Hi, my name is Rita Leduc, and I am here to give a presentation entitled Extending Ecology. It's the story of an ongoing Oika research project with Rich Blundell, an ecologist, Rita Leduc, myself, an artist, and the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, an ecosystem. It began in fall 2021 and continues through the present. To begin, I would like to just kind of lay the groundwork with some quotes. These first two quotes come from Ian McGilchrist, who's the author of The Divided Brain, The Master and His Emissary, and most recently, The Matter with Things, Our Brains, Our Delusions, and the Unmaking of the World. I'm just going to read them. A left brain way of thinking, which is reductive, mechanistic, has taken us over. It treats the world as a simple resource to be exploited. It's made us enormously powerful. It's enabled us to become wealthy, but it's also meant that we've lost the means to understand the world, to make sense of it, to feel satisfaction and fulfillment through our place in the world. And then a second one. What is required is an attentive response to something real and other than ourselves, of which we have only inklings at first, but which comes more and more into being through our response to it, if we are truly responsive to it. We nurture it into being or not. In this, it has something of the structure of love. And finally, from Carl Sagan. When we recognize our place in an immensity of light years and in the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, beauty, and subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined is surely spiritual. So are our emotions in the presence of great art or music or literature, or acts of exemplary selfless courage. The notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both. So these are great words. These are all fantastic words that I live by. However, what I'm going to show you today is a project that is taking these words into action. The doing that we are embarking on is enacting, is embodying, is putting forth into the world what these words are calling for. So I just ask you to keep them in mind as we continue and as I introduce this project. Okay, so just to sort of, again, lay some groundwork, I wanted to give a little snapshot of where I was at creatively in 2019, which is the year that I met my collaborator, Rich Blundell. So I was an artist, I was a professor, and I was a retreat director. That was all well and good. I was living in Brooklyn. I was like doing the art thing, but I was questioning the art world. I'm someone who has always pursued art as a way to get to a broader conversation about life. And so I'm very attracted to interdisciplinary spaces. So I was investigating eco art and art sci. My work has always been made outside. I have a relationship with the environment. And so I thought maybe this is kind of the direction that my conversation is going. However, I felt constricted and I felt underwhelmed by all of the above, the art world, eco art, art sci. There was something there that felt as if I was being kept in a container that was too small for me. And my joints were getting stiff and my muscles were getting sore. And I just wanted to kind of like stretch out and break out of it. I think contributing to that feeling was the fact that I was bursting with what I was receiving creatively. And so I had my artistic practice going. And actually, by 2019, I had already moved out of Brooklyn and was living here in this photo. You can see this is my backyard, but we had moved to the woods, just north of the city. And so I would receive it every day. I had my studio. I would go out and do my creative practice, and I was getting so much, but I paradoxically didn't have anywhere to put it. And so I was searching for growth. I was searching for scientific growth and contemplative growth. And what I thought at the time was sort of a linear spectrum with one on one end and the other on the other end, science and contemplation, spirituality, call it whatever you'd like. And so I was searching for a place outside of categories that I could expand into that would allow the things that were entering into me and my own predispositions to fully flourish and blossom. I wasn't quite finding it, and I was feeling frustrated. Okay, so in 2019, I got a cold call from an ecologist, which is not something that happens every day. And so I thought, oh, this is interesting. Let's see where this one goes. And his name was Dr. Rich Blundell. He had an extensive history of scientific field work. You can see some of the photos on the right here. He got his master's in science communication, his PhD in big history. He was just like, there was an expansive resume here that just sort of seemed unusual to me. And so I started listening. And he told me about what he was about. And what he was about was scientific knowledge of nature, right? So there's a starting point. So he had a lot of scientific knowledge and a lot of experience out in the world, and he was connecting those things. But then he started talking about felt engagement in nature. So phenomenology. And, I was reading phenomenologists. I was very much interested in phenomenology. I'm synesthetic. So that's always sort of been something that I've tried to figure out. And so for this scientist to start talking about feelings in nature and the phenomenology of nature and how that connects to his scientific knowledge, well, that continued my curiosity. Then he started talking about finding meaning in facts. So kind of further along here, that there's science and that there's facts to know about the natural world, but that if you interrogate them further and further beyond reductionism and start to piece them back together, what you actually find is meaning. And so again, further on, he would then take that to cosmic evolution, the story of the cosmos and our place in the cosmos, and how that love that we can channel through us yields healing. And then paradigm shifts came up, and then this thing called Oika. And so, as you can imagine, I'm just sitting here like mouth agape. I mean, it took some time for this to all really unfold, but it definitely piqued my curiosity. So Oika was this thing that Rich was talking about when he called me. That was kind of his baby that he was sort of like talking to me about and channeling all of this stuff through. And so just a little bit about what Oika is. Extending Ecology is an Oika project. And so what does that mean? And so Oika is the creativity, intelligence, joy, beauty, and wisdom in transformative times. It can refer to a couple different things, namely the creative life force itself. I'll just leave that at that. A living philosophy of principles and practices, and then a globally integrated but loosely organized group of cultural creatives, and we'll get to them later. The priorities of Oika are seeking, aligning with, and cultivating right relationship with nature. So we'll talk about what that means through the project. Personal and planetary health, healing, and prosperity. Human and other than human dignity and justice, and synergistic relationships between science, creativity, technology, and wisdom traditions. And so again, just sort of this kind of amalgamation of all these things in a space that really felt like the space that I was looking for. I wasn't quite sure where it was going, so I stayed along for the ride. Yeah, and here's a slide that just really describes my train of thought here. I was skeptical a scientist could do much about my current state of affairs. You can refer back to the McGilchrist quote about that. But I was intrigued, and because the world was on fire, I had to try. As it turns out, my skepticism was paradoxically right, while gloriously wrong. So Rich turned out to not be your average scientist, and Oika turned out to not be your average idea. Okay, so now we're going to kind of get closer to the smaller. I just gave you a really big picture. We're going to return to the big picture later. But for now, I'm going to show you an example through our project, Extending Ecology. And so Rich and I started developing a relationship. We would talk a lot. We would talk about science. We would talk about nature, talk about art and creativity and how all these things are intertwined. And we were like, we got to do a project together. Let's figure something out. And so in fall of 2021, we embarked on a collaboration with each other and with Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, which is a long-term ecological research site in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It's best known, so it was opened in the 1960s, and it's best known for the discovery of acid rain. And so there were lots of studies there through the brook where they discovered a way to ameliorate acid rain. And so what we were going to do was embark upon sustained relational engagement with both scientific knowledge and creative being. And so, sort of categorically, Rich was the ecologist. He was going to bring the scientific knowledge, and I was the artist. I was going to bring the creative being. But what was really going to happen, whereas we we didn't like intertwine, like we stayed in our lanes. But what ended up happening was through that parallel play and through this relational movement, these two things started to become almost undiscernible. And so we took co-creative risks with ecological intelligence and the creative life force. This is what we said we were planning to do. We were going to transfer the healing ecological dynamics from the forest into us and into culture. And this was going to be offered as a whole brain remedy for the meta crisis. Now, this is what Oika is about. So, and this is what Rich's PhD was about, was how nature and how the knowledge of the cosmos and scientific knowledge can transform you in a way that is going to help you become someone who can transfer the creative life force into the world and help ameliorate the meta crisis, right? But this was us trying to offer it in a way that took it from nature to our personal experience and then somehow into culture. Now, we didn't state what those outcomes were going to be, and I'll get to that later, but this was kind of the pitch in the beginning. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go, we're going to have a relationship with this place, we're going to invite all three of us into collaboration, and we're going to see what happens. So we did. Sustained relational engagement. We walked through the forest, about 8,000 acres. We played in the forest. We went to the forest at different seasons. We went into the water. We went into the snow. We sat in the forest. We thought in the forest. We looked at the forest. We communicated with the forest. We touched the forest. And we practiced in the forest. There's me drawing. There's Rich looking at an ash tree, wondering. The emerald ash borer just showed up 3 years ago, so there's some changes happening there. But we went all over it. We just really started to get to know this forest, and it wanted us there. I mean, it was just amazing how much it fully embraced us. Okay, and so sustained relational engagement with, there were two things, right? Scientific knowledge and creative expression. So scientific knowledge, here's just a couple of examples. I take pretty extensive notes. And so there's a book on the show and tell table that is Anecdotes of Continuity. And those are notes that came from conversation with Rich and with the forest in the first 2.5 years of this project. And so these are just two examples of the more scientific notes. I'll read them quickly. Periphery of granite. I sat and listened to Rich and the waterfall explain periphery of granite. Slow, steady cooling deep in the earth until suddenly the cooling quickens and the crystals finally rise to the surface. The result is a rock with significant difference in size between the smaller crystalline structure and larger phenocrysts. As I internalized the process, it rang familiar. Strategic patience. Niche construction. After Rich witnessed my data collection process for the first time, he sent me an article on enactivism. One of the 4 E's of 4E cognitive science, enactivism uses the lens of a different field to describe what ecologists would call niche construction. In this feedback loop, the world is creating the organism and the organism is creating the world. Breathe it in, fill up with it, and exhale. And then the creative being part. Here's 2 examples from the notes. Dying in a small way. Sharing our practices together in the forest revealed overlaps despite our different fields. My boundary dissolution and Rich's dying in a small way, not to be confused with dying a little bit every day, is us tapping into the whole and being part of it. It's an experience of expansion and clarity. Suddenly something clicks in and is able to flow freely through us. And we let it. And scaling up intimacy. If relationships deepen by being candid and vulnerable, how does one develop an ever-deepening, intimate relationship with an increasingly larger entity such as the world? This becomes a non-issue with scale independence. But how does one become scale independent? The rocks water know. The raindrops watersheds know. When you're scale independent, you just do you, and the rest follows. And then I created artwork. So visual expressions of conversation, engagement, and relationship. And I'm not going to go too far into my process here or my practice, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end. This particular artwork is investigating tipping points, which is something that the scientists are really focusing on right now with climate change. And I was thinking a lot about tipping points and sort of expanding the idea of tipping points beyond just tipping points in the far as they're telling us about climate change, but tipping points in ourselves and tipping points in a life, or tipping points just like, what is a tipping point? What does it mean to tip? And what does it mean to be pre-tip? And what does it mean to be tipping? And so this artwork was my investigation in that. And there were 4 of them. You'll see a couple of them show up again later. There's a series of 4. Each one had 3, an oil painting, an acrylic painting, and then the GIF in the center. Here's another example of some of the artwork I created. There are these winter drawings, very, very tiny drawings. There was a picture of me making one. They're made out in the forest. And then this drawing on the right is a very detailed graphite drawing, which is a much slower, much more meticulous process that happens in the studio. And then this is a tapestry of sort of the ongoing work. It's not everything represented, but again, like, so my practice is about cultivating this process of acquaintance, and the artwork that I create is a byproduct and a continuation of that relationship, that deepening of the intimacy, deepening of the conversation. And so eventually, not everything is spoken of through words. And so for me, my practice is very much about like thinking through these things visually, collecting the data, putting the data together, trying to figure out what it's trying to say. In a way, that's how the forest speaks, to me, through me. And in this case, additionally, rich as well. So these artworks, while created by me, some on site and some in the studio, they really are an amalgamation of the synthesis of like this collaboration. Again, I'm happy to talk more about them later. And they're ongoing. And so this will just continue to grow as the collaboration continues. Okay, so in fall of 2023, we were fortunate enough to be invited into the Museum of the White Mountains by Megan Dougherty, who's the curator and director there. It's part of Plymouth State University. And so we had an exhibition, and it was a real opportunity to kind of really figure out, okay, so like nature went into us, like the creative life force infused us, like that part worked. Now, how do we deliver it to others? How do we invite others in? Because so much of it was, there's like almost like an inside joke. When like you have a rapport, and then to try to help invite others into that rapport, it's as a host, it's on you to kind of figure out how to welcome them in. And so we really didn't want to create a typical art exhibition. We wanted it to look something, where it was like sort of like an art exhibition, but also sort of like a science space where there was a lot of text. And we'll get to that text in a moment. But anyway, this is the exhibition. And Rich's blurb about it here, I'll just read below. Extending ecology is an attempt to reconnect human beings with the grounded source of natural ecological intelligence we call Oika. Through sustained relational experiential engagement with scientific knowledge immersed in nature, we rediscover the creative continuity that has always bound us together. By taking co-creative risks with this intelligence, nature's deep wisdoms transfer through humans and into culture, guiding and empowering us to resolve a meta crisis and heal the world. And so, like I said, in order to do that, we really tried to break open the kind of construct of the art exhibition. And so while, yes, there were some very abstract pieces, there was also text that would invite you in, depending on what entry point you prefer. If you're more of like a kind of a right brain sort of visual thinker, you might enter through the artwork. If you really like text to start, there was text there. However, Rich did something that I really loved, which is the text didn't describe the artwork. The text spoke oftentimes in a poetic, sometimes narrative, sometimes scientific way to the relationship that the artwork was also speaking to in its own way. And so together, the text and the artwork created this sort of third thing where we were really trying to not just deliver our product to you, but create a space with them, a relational space that then the viewer could enter into and sort of absorb over time, however they wanted to. This minute is it's a little uncomfortable for people sometimes. It's because sometimes people want to come in and just be told like what to do and what to think. And we knew that was going to be hard. And so there was other text in the exhibition that kind of helped usher people into this kind of a space. So it was just a really interesting design challenge from that perspective. And so we were also very fortunate to have an anthropologist come and speak on the exhibition. He studied it quite intensely. Again, we were very grateful for this. And he gave a talk. His name was David Searing, and he has been studying art sci collaborations as well as indigenous knowledge around I think mostly North America, some Central America. Anyway, he came and gave a great talk. There's links to it all over the place. So if you're interested in listening, there's also a transcript of it and a catalog that I brought along with me. So, and that's available on a PDF as well. So just ask me about it if you want to hear it. But here's just a little quote. You can see on the right, there's a diagram that Rich created that talks about the art sci framework. And that's what David's referencing. I would say, based on what I've been experiencing and thinking about for the past few years, the current conventional practice of art sci sits somewhere near the middle of this diagram. This is certainly a step toward integrating arts, humanities, and indigenous knowledge with the sciences. It's a start, but it's only a start. While some work in the art sci world certainly expands out into some of the outer circles here, circles 2, 3, and 4, what I'm finding with my visits with scientists, artists, ethicists, and others working at long-term ecological research sites is that there's a hunger for reaching towards the outer edges here of Rich's circles. Not just because more is good, but because the world is burning and we need to reach those outer circles to respond to the literally existential questions of who humans are in the larger meshwork of the world. And so on the right here, David talks about how he believes that our project really is extending out to that wider edge of the framework, and that is what we need. And so it was just kind of amazing to hear David report back on, what his sense is that, the world needs, and where the kind of current trends are and what he was seeing in what we were doing. And so it was just it was a way to sort of, it was a green light for us in a way, like, okay, something here that is working for us is starting to show through. It's starting to show up to someone who at least spent a ton of time paying attention. And so that was a really beautiful, wonderful sign. Okay, so that was in fall of 2023. Here we are in spring of 2024. So Ecology Extended, Extending Ecology, where are they now? And so from 2021 to 2023, again, so look, just to remind you, like we set out with quite an interesting list of things we wanted to do, but it didn't have any sort of like what we would call deliverables or outcomes, right? We wanted to really leave that open. We wanted to just trust that our interaction with the forest would inevitably lead us to these quote unquote deliverables. I call them byproducts. And in fact, they did, right? So we had exhibitions, talks, and workshops at universities, museums, and conferences in the US and internationally. There were publications, articles, catalogs, and anthologies, local TV and news media, podcasts, and then collaborations with additional creatives. And so we really, truly did extend ecology, the forest, extended through us and out into the world. So that was really amazing just to sort of like see that happen. And so we're hungry. We want more, and we don't want to abandon the forest or the collaboration. It's just so good. It's too good. And so we're continuing. And so what is happening now? Well, we're continuing our baseline checks with Hubbard Brook and each other. So we'll be going again this July. And then continued extensions, and then something called oikonomics, which I will explain. But before I do, I just wanted to check in with me, right? So we got my baseline in 2019, and I thought it was only fair to tell you where I'm at in 2024. Okay, so I'm still an artist, I'm still a professor, and I am now an Oika cultural creative. And Oika research has created the space for me too. You can see in red here, these are the things that I wrote about 2019. So here now, I am able to operate between disciplines and bubbles. I'm able to co-create into a third thing. I feel inspired and energized. I'm still bursting with what I'm receiving creatively. I'm finding continual scientific and contemplative growth. I'm able to share finally what I'm receiving beyond constructed boundaries and that liberates and thus expands my creative research into planetary systems change. Like, thank goodness I have been given somewhere to put this thing and the challenge of figuring out how to do it. Like, I could not be more grateful, woohoo, to my collaborators. Thank you, Rich, Hubbard Brook, and the world. So that's where I'm at, feeling pretty good. Okay, so where's the research at? So, I talked about tipping points before. There's been I actually have, there's a research map on the website that kind of tracks the way that my and our research and conversations have sort of expanded through the forest. Right now, we've been focused on the gorge and the way that the light is trapped in the gorge. And so actually in the Agora space here at the festival, you'll see these 6 pieces are printed on banners alongside, interspersed with 6 photos of Rich and myself researching in the forest. And so this text is pulled from the text right there at the entrance to the Agora. Within Hubbard Brook Forest runs a brook by the same name. About a mile upstream from the forest boundary, there is a gorge. In 2022, while following the cues of the forest, light caught by this gorge piqued Rich's curiosity. Viewing this as an invitation, Rich and Rita soon found themselves standing at the foot of a magnetic pool of light. Due to exquisite geologic formations, the gorge itself is inaccessible. To Rich and Rita, this feels important and right. Despite, or maybe because of this, they visit the gorge during seasonal baseline checks and study how it attracts and holds the light. Standing there, feeling the concentrated glow, they also study how they themselves can't help but fill up with the very same light, phenomenologically, emotionally, and cognitively. So that's where we're at. I've been, these mixed media drawings are me trying to really study and investigate, like, how does the forest collect and then extend this light? And my suspicion is that this is what we're all here to do, is to sort of like bring it in, fill it up with it, and then share it out. And so that's where we're moving into here. And this part of the presentation is we're going to open back up into the rest of the Oika projects, and then we're going to open up even further to us here now today. So first extension that's happening this year is that Rich and myself and Walking Backward, which is a performative team, a performance art team, Michelle Erard and Nikki Tulk, we will be joining a team at McLeish Field Station, which is part of Smith College. And Michelle and Nikki came into our exhibition and did 5 amazing performances. They essentially started cultivating their own relationship with the exhibition, with the forest, and then with Rich and myself. And so their performances were just truly amazing, very kind of I don't want to say interdisciplinary, but they combine a lot of performative techniques and just created multiple more entry points for visitors. And we're so grateful for them. And we're very excited to see what happens at McLeish. So again, so Rich and myself are sort of extending into McLeish, bringing McLeish into conversation with Hubbard Brook, Rich, and myself, and then also extending into Michelle and Nikki, bringing them into conversation, us going into conversation with them and their work, and then the whole thing together going into one big conversation. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're really grateful to Paul at McLeish for letting us come in and embark on this experiment. Rich is currently visiting scientists in residence at Mariah Mitchell Association out in Nantucket. And this summer, he's going to be leading some ocean acidification research out in the harbor. And so I've been invited to come in and do my creative being part while he does the scientific knowledge part. And we're going to see what happens there. I'm going to be drawing the eelgrass, which is affected by the acidification. And I'm going to be learning about all sorts of stuff, and also drawing in a boat and drawing in the water. And that's something I've never done before. And so we're going to see where that goes. Okay. And so these are just, the couple projects that I just described for you are just a couple of many projects that are growing in the Oika ecosystem. Essentially what happens is people get curious, people show up, and then people figure out how they want to share the creative life force through them, through what they do. And so projects that are happening right now is Oika Nantucket, which has actually been going on for 3 years. And we had a group of artists come last year And so there's been all sorts of programming happening there. Oika Spain, which is run by Fred Adam, out in a wetland in southern Spain. He has built an amazing hut that offers workshops and residencies, art exhibitions, tours, and there's some restoration work that's happening there as well. A Rich World View is a new media channel that Rich will be sharing Earth stories, Oika deep dives, curiosity quests, and campfires. And so that's a place to really start to enter into the Oika ideas, principles, practices, and community. That's a really good starting point. And there's Expedition Zagori, which was led by curator Geert Vermeer. And there are residencies and art exhibitions there. And so there's just all sorts of things happening all over the world. It's really just like, again, Oika is very much about the doing. And so it's like, go in, enter in on the ground, develop a tethered relationship to the continuity, to nature, and then figure out how it wants to speak through you. And then let's all support each other in making that happen. And so part of that support, this is something that we're all working on together, and it's something that's been kind of in the wings for a while, is Oikonomics. And so through all of these offerings, these byproducts, these outcomes that end up happening, so artwork or workshops, talks, residencies, restoration efforts, we are trying to figure out how to recouple economy with ecology. And so this is a concept that was modeled after ecological abundance mentality. So essentially, now we have a showroom on the website, and any artist that's working on an Oika project that wants to put their offering on the showroom is able to, and then the sales are distributed to the cultural creative, the location somehow. So sometimes that's offered towards restoration efforts or a foundation that's taking care of the land. Or like there's a Mashpee Wampanoag tribe that the funds would also go to. So stewards of the land or any, it depends. It's the cultural creative gets to decide sort of how to distribute. And then also towards future Oika projects. So new people that come in that need to kind of kickstart a project, a certain percentage of these sales will also support these new projects. Oftentimes the value is relational, and something we're experimenting with is finding a biomarker. So like in Spain, Fred has some pieces that are tied to the duck population in the wetland. And as the population goes up, the value of whatever he's offering also goes up. And then support is reciprocal. So again, like I said, like, one creative sales is also contributing to like new projects. And so there's just all of this kind of abundance and new growth and support in each other's prosperity that's happening. And that's like emotional support, financial support, intellectual support, all of it. We're here for each other, and that's really beautiful. Here's just an example of something that I just want to note is that although it's sort of started with a lot of artist types, because artists tend to be the ones that are maybe most comfortable with just diving into the unknown and starting something new, we are attracting people from other sectors, and that's something that we truly want to do. So a real biodiverse ecosystem would include all kinds of people. And of course, this excites me so much because that's what I'm looking for in my life, is to not just be in a bubble of one or a couple different sectors, right? And so we're getting people from the wellness industry, we're getting people from the business industry, and so things are really starting to kind of flourish. But I just wanted to say that this is the showroom so far. It's very new, very exciting, but it's also, the composition of it is going to change and expand over time as our composition changes and expands over time. And so here's our growing ecosystem. So we have new moon calls and full moon calls, where new people show up, we onboard people, we hear introductions, we give updates, and it's just awesome. It's just a really nice way to stay connected and talk about the work. It's hard work. The world is like crazy and unpredictable, and so it's just really lovely to have a group of people who are all grounded together through our sort of the Oika principles and practices and that deep relational engagement. Again, back to McGilchrist and Sagan, these are the things that are being called for, but it takes work and it takes rigor. But the work is playful and fun and joyful, and the rigor is not at all like something that you kind of have to drag your feet to do. However, it really does take a daily practice of staying connected in order to really allow that to channel through you and to be able to offer it in the most robust, effective way, generous way possible. And that's what we're all trying to do. So finally, here we are. This is an extension too. So me here right now talking to you, sharing all this stuff. Like, why am I sharing this stuff? Because we're here and because I'm excited and because it feels good and because I think we're all kind of like-minded trying to figure this stuff out. And so I'll just read one last quote from the Gorge exhibition text, and then we're going to open it up. Whether in the gorge, elsewhere in the forest, or between a city block, light attracts and spreads. It calls us forth, fills us up, and then moves on. And yet, if we are dynamic, we can move with it. We can let it lead us and fill us so we might remain attractors for others, sparkling, spreading, and sharing our light into the world. So I just want to bring back, if you remember, like when I met Rich and he was this guy that like combined, that linear spectrum that I was talking about that kind of started to bend when I met him. It's sort of come full circle and now it's just like connected, right? Science and spirituality, you follow the facts into the meaning. We're researching the light in the brook, and what it's telling us to do is to go spread it out into the world. And so again, that's what we're here to do. And now I would like to open the floor, invite you all to ask any questions you'd like. There's some questions here to get us started. I'm also super interested in how are you collecting, sparkling, and sharing your light. I mean, I think we're all here with different projects, different life paths, and so I would really love to hear any of that. So please, let's open it up, and thank you so much.